On February 3rd, radio, television, and newspaper people were going crazy. They were so confused. What was wrong? Well, a famous scientist looking in space saw a UFO now on its way to Earth, flying closer. Everything was in a turmoil. What was wrong? They didn't know. People tried to get news about that UFO. UFO? What's that UFO? Is it real? Not real? People were asking questions of their congressman and the president, and they kept looking, and the UFO had a white flag on it. A white flag? They knew that the white flag meant to stop war, stop something, stop arguing. They were looking, and what did that mean? They didn't know. Different people, religious people, political people, were discussing the possibilities and what would happen to the Earth. They didn't know. It was getting closer and closer to Earth here. Not around it, but straight to it. Wow, they discussed and they discussed. The Russians discussed it. The kings and queens discussed it. They called meetings. What's that? What's that? Is it a spy? Is it from another planet? People were getting upset, and they were discussing it. The Pope was discussing it with different religious leaders. They didn't understand. Do we have life on other planets? We don't know. So they were looking, and then all of a sudden, the UFO stopped. It just stopped. What was wrong? Then all people, deaf, hearing, it didn't matter. They heard something. A speech. Everyone understood it. It said all kings and queens and presidents, the Pope, and all religious leaders must come up to the UFO. How? Oh, well, the U.S. president says, we have space shuttles. Plenty of space shuttles, and we can fly up to the UFO. So come on, all leaders, and we'll take off. And so they took off and went to the UFO. It was so large that all the space shuttles could land on the UFO. All the kings and queens and the leaders went in, and they didn't see anyone in the UFO. They heard something, and they found a rectangle speaking through the rectangle. It wasn't a loudspeaker. The rectangle itself said, "Welcome to this UFO called the White Flag UFO. I want to praise you for your wonderful works, for your countries and the earth. And I want each of you in this rally to, all the presidents, kings and queens, to tell a little bit about your country." The kings and queens and president and the Pope really shocked. Wow, they're honoring us. And they each told about their services to their people, one by one. And once that was over, they said, "You will all be confronted by questions by a council of rectangles." And they brought them into a large council room. And there were rectangles, every color of the rainbow, all around the room. And they started asking intelligent questions regarding peace, war, love, hate, a high level of abstract questions. Then the Council of Rectangles told them that they would now be in a session. The kings and queens and presidents and leaders all stared. They didn't understand the language. And there was a voting. And they said only 2 people have given good answers, reasonable, that made sense. So those 2 people are the Pope and a very young princess. Those 2 can go back to Earth. All other people are to be punished and taken away. So they got the Pope and the princess and put them in the shuttle to go back to Earth. The UFO took off in a split second. It was gone. The Pope and the princess, of course, flew down to Earth and landed, and no one came to get them. They waited, and still no one. So they went ahead and opened the hatch and walked out. And they had found that there had been a nuclear war already, and that all the leaders and the people were gone. Everything was destroyed. All that was left were those 2. They stared at each other. Were they the new Adam and Eve? father was sitting in his chair, and his daughter, a little girl, came up and sat on his lap with the father and said, "Daddy, please tell me a story." The father looked and said, "What should I tell you?" "Oh, I don't know. You know." And the father thought, "I don't know." And the girl looked around the room and saw the fire in the fireplace. "Daddy, how is the fire made? How does the wood burn? How?" The father looked. "Oh, that's a good question. How does the wood burn? Wait a minute, let me think." He thought, and then he said, "Oh, I know how, and I'll explain it to you, all right?" "Oh, yes, please." She was all ears. And the father said, "Oh, a long time ago, that wood was once a tree. The tree used to be very small, just like you. At one time, a seed was planted into the ground, and it grew. Water came and rain, and it fed the plant, and it grew and grew. When the tree grew, it bloomed little leaves, green leaves. And each leaf absorbed the rays of the sun. And the energy of the sun went into the tree. And the tree itself grew and grew and grew and grew, larger, the branches reaching out. The tree, for years and years and years, took in the sun's energy. You know, the sun's very far away, you know, and if the tree moved up to the sun, it would all be destroyed. So it stayed far away, but the tree took in the heat, you know, heat, warmth from the sun, in through the leaves, down through the trunk, storing and storing that, and continually storing it for many years. Later, the tree became old, perhaps, or someone needed the tree, and people came up and chopped the tree down, and then cut the tree up. Those are called logs, you know, what we have right here, and in the fire. So now the wood is placed into the fireplace. You or any other person can strike a match, and that match makes the wood wake up and start burning until the flames are higher and higher. What does all this mean? It means that the wood is giving you what the years and years of energy has given it, and it's waiting for you to strike a match to it to give it to you, the warmth. That's how the wood burns. "Ah," the little girl said. She was fascinated and was wondering. She walked to her room and went to bed and wondered and wondered. "Oh, so interesting, a tree taking the energy and giving me warmth. How wonderful a tree can do that for us." She fell asleep. She woke up in the morning and the sun was shining in brightly. And she thought, "Oh, trees." So she got up and got dressed and ran outside and looked at the trees. She went up to one and felt its trunk, kissed it and caressed it.
I died and my soul went to heaven, and there I saw the golden gates. After looking around, I discovered the gates were locked. That's when I noticed the doorbell. I pushed the button and waited for quite a while. I could see past the gates, but there was nothing much to look at, for there was a hill there, and I couldn't see beyond that. Again, I rang that doorbell, and I kept ringing that thing until finally this old man appeared, walking very slowly toward me. He was quite old, with a long beard. And as I stood there, I was busily thinking to myself how to be polite in a situation like this. Should I introduce myself or what? So he comes up and asks me, "Can I help you?" And well, I said, I recently died, and here I am. The old man said, "Really? You did? What's your name?" So I told him, "John Colada." I don't know you," he replied, which made me ask him who he was. "Peter," he answered. "Oh, yeah, I've heard a lot about you down there. Yeah, you're a very famous man." Yeah, but we're not expecting you." "You're not expecting me?" "No. But look, I just died. Don't you see me right here in front of you? Look, here's my soul." "Give me your name again," he says. So I told him, "John Colada." "I don't know. I'm a little bit taken back by all this. There must be some mistake." So I said, "Well, maybe there is." "Wait a minute," he continued. "I have the Book of Life in my house nearby. Why don't you come in and we'll take a look?" That was fine with me, so he opened the gate and we went in. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It smelled so beautiful, just like morning dew. It smelled of flowers and everything fresh. I went into the house where there was this wall of books. He stood by one shelf and asked me my name again. I told him again. "What year were you born?" he asked after opening a book. I told him that, and he thumbed through some pages while asking where I was born. I gave him that answer too. "Listen, I'm sorry," he says. "I don't know who you are," closing the book and putting it back on the shelf. "Something here is wrong." "Well, what could possibly be wrong?" I inquired. "Well, possibly you have sinned." But I thought I had absolved all my sins." And at this, the old man took out a bundle of chalk. "I want you to make an X for all the sins you have committed. And you have to do it on the steps outside of the gate." Oh, on the gate well, okay. So the two of us went back outside of the gates, and the old man told me, "Well, good luck now. Make sure all your sins are crossed out." So I was there on the steps, trying to remember and busily making X's, and this went on for quite a long time. I was slashing away at my X's. My list was quite long. And then I saw this friend of mine coming up the path towards me. I was kind of embarrassed. I didn't want him to notice me. I thought to myself, "Oh, this is really bad news." There was no place to hide. I was right in the middle of the path to heaven, so there was nothing to do but to greet him. So I waved hello, and he came up and asked me what was going on. And I said, "Well, I've been here making X's for all of my sins." And to this he replied, "Yeah, I know, it's a pain. I've been doing the same thing, and I've been going up now for my third piece of chalk."
My story is about a man and a woman. They were married and retired, living in Vermont, up in New England. It occurred in 1945, right after World War II had ended, and the story occurred at that time. One day, John, the retired man who used to work for the railroad, after working, he retired, and every morning he would get up to go to the woods to chop firewood, take it back home to put in the fireplace. His wife, Mary, would use the fire for cooking and warming the house. They didn't have much money. They weren't rich at all. They had to be very careful with their money. So one day, John was walking to the woods, just as he did every day, and he got close to the forest and he noticed a dog. Oh, it was a beautiful dog, an Irish setter, a hunting dog. It was really beautiful. He looked around, wondering who it was, and there was no one around. So they went into the woods. He saw a good tree, and he started chopping away. He noticed the dog was hanging around, just looking, smelling the ground, going around the tree. So he left it. He forgot about the dog and kept on chopping. For the morning, on through the morning, he chopped the tree up, and he would not take all of it back to the house. He would come back the next day and get some more. So he started walking back home again with a load of wood on his back, and the dog followed him. He petted the dog and kept walking toward the house. He had forgotten about the dog by then. He went in, put the wood away. The owner was nowhere in sight. So he went in and called his wife, said, "Look at the dog." He started explaining about the dog following him into the forest and following him back home. "It's a beautiful dog." And Mary agreed. "I wonder who it belongs to. I feel later a person will come and get it." All day long and on into the night, it got dark and the dog was still running around in their yard. "Oh, I feel it's probably right. Maybe we ought to just send it outside and leave it." And so they put it outside and they went back to bed, and they were in bed all night. The next morning they got up and he started to go to the woods to get more firewood for the day. He got his axe, put it over his shoulder, and he saw the dog was still there. He was wondering, "Oh, well, my wife's still asleep." John loved to go hunting, so he thought he'd see if the dog was a good hunting dog. So he went back in the house, and he put away the axe and got his rifle, and they went on out into the woods. And they hunted all morning. It was a wonderful dog. The dog would point and retrieve, and they got many good birds, and he put them in a sack and carried them on home, and the dog followed him on home. When he got home, he had to explain it to his wife, so he woke her up and says, "I've got a surprise for you." She woke up and saw all those beautiful birds laid out there. "How'd you get them?" And he explained, "Well, I thought I'd change my routine. Instead of going to get wood, I would go hunting with the dog. It's a wonderful dog, a very valuable dog, too." "Oh, that's beautiful," she said. But a little later, the wife saw that the husband was outside with the dog and saw the dog was being encouraged to follow her husband. So about noontime, when her husband came in to eat, she explained, "That's not right. It's to keep a dog that's not ours. Maybe it's best if you go to town, knock on a few doors, and find out who the dog belongs to and give it back to them." Well, he said, "Oh, yeah, I guess that's right. Inside I know it's right. I'll go and check." So he went and he knocked at 2 or 3 doors, and nobody knew anything about the dog. He came back and said, "Nobody knew anything about it." She said, "Oh, well, I have a better idea. Maybe we should put an ad in the paper. And, perhaps the dog belongs to some children, and they're real heartbroken over losing the dog. We have to be honest." So he said, "Okay," and he went to the newspaper, and he explained that he wanted to put an ad in the paper for 7 days because 7 days is cheaper than 1 day at a time. So for lower cost, they had the ad put in the paper. So the next morning he opened it up, and sure enough, there was the ad in the paper. And he still wanted to take opportunity to go hunting with the dog, before somebody came to take it away. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and no one had come. It was getting close to Christmas, and he felt, maybe people are busy. The war just ended recently. They're shopping and everything. Maybe they aren't paying attention about lost dogs. So we'll see. So it got closer to Christmas, and there was still no response. On the last day of the advertisement in the newspaper, the 7th day, 2 days before Christmas, he opened it up, and the ad was still there. In the morning, no one came. And he felt, well, after 7 days, maybe I can keep the dog. Maybe the people moved away or lost the dog and don't care about it. So he waited, and he went out to work on the fence, mending the fence in the front yard. And he noticed on the road a car coming around. Car was coming. There weren't many cars during that time, 1945. Not around that area. So he was working on the fence, and then he noticed the car turned around and was coming into his driveway. And it pulled in. He was heartsick. He knew that the dog belonged to the owner of that car. And he followed his wife's advice. They had to be honest. The car was real fancy, and a young man came out. And, he must have been below 25, and he was dressed real nice, very rich clothing. And he walked up to John, and he says, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Noble, who put the ad in the newspaper about the lost dog?" He says, "Yes, I am. My name is John Smith, and I had a good hunting dog, and I lost it. I came to see if perhaps the dog you found is mine. Where's the dog?" And John said, "Oh, there he is, way over there." He hollered, whistled, and the dog came running up in front of them. And he says, "Is this your dog?" The man looked it over. "Oh, I don't know. It looks like my dog, a real strong resemblance, the color, and looks smart. He has a white spot on his forehead, just like my dog, but it's still hard to say. Wait a minute. What was the name of your dog?" "My dog's name was Henry." So they said, "Henry?" The dog just looked up and looked back down. Again said, "Henry?" No response. "Well, there's no response." He says, "Well, that's not my dog." He wouldn't answer to the name. My dog would respond immediately to the name if I called him. He says, "I'm sorry, it's just not my dog. Do you live here? Is this your home?" And John said, "Yes." "Oh, it's a nice place. Do you have your own dog?" He says, "No, I don't." "Do you like to hunt?" "Oh, yes, I love to hunt. And this is a wonderful hunting dog. I took a dog hunting a few days ago, and it was wonderful. It really enjoyed the hunting. You must have an owner. You sure it's not yours?" "No, it's not mine." "Well, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I thought it might be mine." And John was so relieved. He was glad it didn't belong to the man. "Maybe I'll get to keep it now." He reached out to shake his hand, and noticed that the man had an injured hand. He had injured it in the war. The man reached over with his other hand and shook. John felt sorry for the man. He had injured his hand in the war. He understood. And the man got in his car and took off. So he went running in the house. He said, "Mary, look, the dog didn't belong to the man. Maybe it's ours now. Maybe we can keep it." She said, No, people may be very heartbroken. Let's wait 1 or 2 more days. We're not sure. Let's wait." Oh, John was welling up with hope. It was growing again. And the next morning, it was December 24th. Again, he went hunting. And he got some birds and brought them home to eat. And he worked with the dog and played with the dog outside, and in the afternoon he kept looking down the road, worrying that other people might come and take the dog. And he noticed a Western Union man on his bicycle coming up. During the war, people were afraid to see this bicycle because they knew he was bringing bad news to the people about people being hurt or killed in the war. But the war was over, and he had no children anyway, so, maybe the Western Union man's going to other people. But he turned around and started coming toward John, and John became afraid, and he was wondering about what was in the telegram. And it was Jimmy. He knew Jimmy. He'd seen him often. He said, "Hello, Jimmy, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Mr. Noble. I have a telegram for you." "For me?" Thank you. I don't understand why I would have one, but thank you, Jimmy." And Jimmy left. He was afraid to open it up. Maybe I better go and inform Mary. He went into the house and he said, "Mary, a telegram for us." Oh, she was frightened. They opened it up and they read it, and it said, "Try calling it Lucky. Signed, a friend." I don't understand what it means. Try calling it Lucky? Signed, a friend? I'm curious. And she thought, maybe it's the dog. Yes, maybe it is. So John went outside, and the dog was way over in the yard, and he hollered out, "Lucky? Lucky?" The dog looked up and ran up to John and jumped up on him and licking his face, and John tried to push him away, and he realized his name was Lucky. He looked at the telegram again, the connection with the dog, and he thought, oh, the young man who came yesterday with the injured arm that was hurt in the war. He was asking me about hunting and if I had a dog. Oh, John finally understood.
My story starts out with a young college graduate who became a preacher. He was a good speaker. And he got a job as a preacher in a small town. And during that time, the churches were not very big. Now, the sermons that he gave were always positive and were never about sin or fire and brimstone. The congregation always went home happy because he let them know that they were loved by God. The most appealing thing that people noticed about him was that his speeches were 20 minutes long, never more or never less. And after he finished, the choir would sing, and then everyone would go home. The people were pleased that the sermons were so brief and that time wasn't wasted. The sermons were always 20 minutes long every time he preached. Now, a friend in the congregation was wondering why his sermons were exactly 20 minutes long every Sunday. So he decided to ask. The preacher replied, "Well, that's simple. Right before I get ready to give a sermon, I pop a lifesaver, and when it's gone, that tells me that it's time to stop." The congregation grew, and people from all over would come to hear him preach. He was a good preacher, and the congregation was made up of good people too. They always went home happy. People didn't mind giving donations to the church because they enjoyed hearing him preach the love of God, but they wouldn't pay just to hear sermons about the wages of sin. The money that was collected never amounted to much, even though the congregation grew and grew. People were having to sit closer and closer together, all bunched up. There was one woman in the congregation who didn't like having to sit so close to her husband. She didn't want this to happen, but had no choice. Once she got over it, they seemed to come closer together again, in a loving way. Finally, it became so crowded that the walls were bursting, and the church windows seemed like they were ready to pop out. Because the money collected was so little, the church didn't have much money. And when the preacher went to buy a suit, it had to be an inexpensive one. And his wife was a clever woman. She knew that 3 buttons on the cuff meant an inexpensive suit. She got more buttons and sewed one on each cuff so that there were 4, and this made the suit look more expensive. While he was preaching one day, one of the buttons was dangling from the cuff. So he stuck it in his pocket. On one Sunday, he began the sermon, and everything was going as usual. Then he realized that he had run over time, but the lifesaver was still in his mouth. Finally, his wife stood up in the back of the room and waved for him to stop, which he did, but he couldn't figure out what in the world happened. He took out the lifesaver and realized that it was the button instead. This is the story that I like so very much.
Once upon a time, there was a small town by the water, nestled in the countryside. Every day the children would visit an old man who sat by an old oak tree, and their parents would be harvesting the fields to sell the produce in the town. The children would always go along to talk to the old man so they could hear him tell his stories. One of their favorites was about a bridge that their forefathers had built over the water many years ago. The bridge had opened up access to the outside world for the town, and the townspeople were very proud of it. One day, a small boy stood up and asked the old man, "Where is the world's largest picture?" Well, the old man thought that one over, and after some considerable time realized that he couldn't come up with an answer. "That's a good question," he said. "Where is the world's largest picture? I'll have to go on a long journey to find out where the world's largest picture is." He announced this to the townsfolk, that he was leaving town to search for it. He told them that he would use their beloved bridge to carry him to the outside world to seek the world's largest picture. He left and traveled over mountains, across plains, and through the valleys. He visited many different cities and asked everyone he met if they knew where the world's largest picture was. Some people thought it might be in a church, while others would send him elsewhere. Everyone had a different idea. The old man realized how difficult it was to find the world's largest picture. He finally gave up, but on his way home he happened to meet a peddler. The peddler had also journeyed all over the countryside and had had many experiences in his travels. So the old man asked him, "In your travels, have you ever seen the world's largest picture?" The peddler replied, "I have some news for you," and they spoke quietly for several minutes. The old man became very excited and started home. When he arrived back home, all the townspeople asked him, "Have you seen it?" To which he responded, "Yes, I have." Happiness reigned, and all agreed to decorate the bridge. After all, if it weren't for the bridge, they would never have received the good news. It was decided to wait until the celebration to learn the answer to the question of the world's largest picture. They prepared a big feast and made merry with dancing and games and such. At last the time came, and all sat down with eyes focused on the old man. But strangely enough, he started talking about trees and flowers, birds, clouds, and the sun and the like. The townspeople were still puzzled when the old man stopped talking. Someone stood up and said, "Come on, tell us. Where is the world's largest picture?" And the old man replied, "In your mind."